Welcome to the Delmarva Almanac. Each week we connect you to the best of Delmarva. Now here's naturalist Dave Wilson and his guest Dr. Aaron Hogue to tell us about apex predators here on Delmarva.
My guest today is Dr. Aaron Hogue, who is a biology professor at Salisbury University, where he has worked for the past 11 years. He holds a PhD in evolutionary biology from the Northwestern University in Chicago. His specialties are in mammalogy and evolution, and he's done extensive research studying the nexus between human activities, terrestrial habitat destruction, and species declines. Today, we're going to discuss biodiversity on the peninsula and how the loss of apex predators and other mammals has affected the shore's biota and what we might do about it. Dr. Hogue?
Good morning.
Let's begin with what we've lost. What apex predators used to be here that are no longer on the shore?
In terms of carnivores, mammalian carnivores as a whole, we did an extensive survey of the archaeological and historical literature, and we were able to document 10 species as being native to the peninsula. Of those, I would say 4 could qualify as apex predators. Those would be cougar, bobcat, wolves, and we can talk about which species of wolves, and black bear. The other predators that are native would have been gray fox, raccoon, long-tailed weasel, mink, river otter, and skunk.
And how many of those have we lost or are no longer on the peninsula?
All of the species that I would say could qualify as apex predators are gone. Cougar were probably the first to go. Wolves and black bear were heavily persecuted, as were bobcat. And the last record I could document of wolves was 1768, and the last evidence of black bear was in the Great Cypress Swamp in southern Delaware in 1906. Bobcats, it's a little less clear. When they disappeared, I have evidence from as recently as the 1980s, but beyond that, they seem to have disappeared.
How has the loss in general of apex predators, and particularly on the shore, affected biodiversity on the shore, other species?
There isn't really any research locally, in part because most of those species disappeared well before people really cared to investigate it. So I can only go based on work that's been done elsewhere. And the role of top predators has been pretty extensively analyzed in many parts of the world, including in the United States. And consistently what is found is that top predators exert a top-down effect on ecosystems. The typical term applied to them, to that role, is trophic cascades. And they influence all aspects of the ecosystems, either through their predation on herbivores, or really any species in general, as well as their effect on mid-sized predators called mesopredators. And there's even a term to describe their effect on mesopredators, and that's mesopredator release. By their role in suppressing mesopredators, that in turn has ripple effects throughout the ecosystem, as does their impact on herbivores. The classic study from the United States would be on gray wolves and their impact on the ecosystem in Yellowstone. They were extirpated from Yellowstone many decades ago, and because gray wolves were federally listed as a threatened or endangered species under the Endangered Species Act, they were reintroduced to the Yellowstone ecosystem, and decades of research looking at their impact on not only other vertebrates, but also on the vegetation of the Yellowstone ecosystem, found that they not only exerted an impact on large herbivores like elk and white-tailed deer and moose, but the downstream effect on many aspects of the ecosystem were pretty extensive. For example, with the absence of gray wolves in those ecosystems, the large herbivores would be able to go essentially anywhere they wanted to, and they would aggregate along stream edges where they would eat most of the vegetation, eliminating many of the tree seedlings as well as the low-lying vegetation of shrubs and herbaceous plants, and that denuded most of those stream edges of vegetation, which then affected the hydrology of the area and eliminated potential habitat, streamside habitat, for a lot of the birds and other small vertebrates in those areas. So their presence profoundly altered those ecosystems in favor of greater biodiversity and so on. What that would mean locally is not completely clear, but it's reasonable to assume that comparable impacts would be present on Delmarva, and so the loss of those large predators probably results in a lowered biodiversity and distribution of many small vertebrates.
Are there any species here now that are comparable to gray or red wolves or bobcats that are having an impact on the ecosystem similar to what those species would have had? On the eastern shore, the closest would be coyote. Those would be they sort of, depending on where they're found, they can play a role as a mesopredator. They can play a role as a top predator. Given the absence of all the top carnivores on the eastern shore, they have the potential to fill that role at least partially. So and to exert impacts on those mesopredators like fox in particular, domestic cats, etc. Research in other parts of the country, for example, in California, found that in areas where coyote are present, they actually control some of these mid-sized predators, including domestic cats, and that has profound impacts on a lot of small vertebrates, including a lot of breeding birds. So their presence here presumably would present a similar impact on local ecosystems by controlling cat populations and controlling some of the fox populations, including red fox, which are technically not native either. And that would presumably benefit many of the breeding birds in the area, especially the songbirds and other small birds. I want to talk a little bit more about coyotes when we have you in the studio next week. But for now, we've been talking to Dr. Aaron Hogue from Salisbury University. He's a mammologist who has done extensive work on apex predators and their relation to humans and human involvement in their extirpation. So thank you, Dr. Hogue, for visiting us today.
Thank you for having me.
For more information on coyotes and other apex predators, you can go to delmarvaalmanac.com/nature.
Thanks, Dave. Well, that's all for this edition of the Delmarva Almanac. Be sure to follow us on Facebook or Twitter, and next week join us to learn more about our local culture and get connected to our natural wonders. We'd like to thank our community partners, the Friends of Delmarva Public Radio, and our underwriters for their help in bringing this program to you, our audience. If you'd like to become an underwriter for this program, visit delmarvaalmanac.com/support. Our theme music was provided by Brightside Studio. This show has been a Moonshell production. Thanks for listening. Until we meet again, may the rhythms and tides of Delmarva bring you good fortune.